The first time Ben noticed the girl, she was already crying. It wasn't loud. No heaving sobs or broken gasps. Just a steady stream down pale cheeks as she sat by herself near the back of the bus, fingers tangled tight around the frayed strap of her backpack, her head tilted toward the frosted window like she might disappear into it if she stayed still enough. Ben didn't say anything. He kept his hands on the wheel, eyes on the road slick with slush and early light. But his gaze flickered to the mirror again and again, catching the same image. A child made of silence and shadows. He'd seen her before, always alone, always quiet, but never crying. Not like that. It was a Tuesday in late November, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones before the sun had the chance to climb above the trees. The heater in the bus wheezed its uneven breath, the windows fogged near the corners, and the seats smelled faintly of wet mittens and old gum. The city moved slowly in the mornings, tired, stubborn, like it didn't want to rise from bed either. Ben, however, had no such luxury. The alarm had gone off at 4:45 a.m. the way it always did. He'd risen in the dark, trying not to wake Ellie, his daughter, who still clung to her stuffed fox like a lifeline, made coffee in silence, laced his boots, kissed her forehead, left a note she probably wouldn't read. It was how the days began. Now, he'd been driving the same school route for nearly 6 years, a single father since Ellie was 2. He didn't talk much anymore, not since Maren passed. He let the rumble of the bus and the rhythm of routine do the speaking for him. But that morning, the crying didn't leave him, even after she stepped off at her usual stop near the cracked brick apartments on Holloway Street, even after the other kids laughed, stomped, shouted their way into the snow-dusted schoolyard, even after the bus was empty again and the hum of the engine became the only sound left. Ben sat behind the wheel, still and slow, and thought about her eyes. They weren't red, not swollen, just tired, like someone who had cried often enough to no longer notice it. That evening, when Ellie climbed up into the front seat of the bus after her dance class, Ben glanced at her. "Do you know a girl, maybe 10 or 11, long brown hair, rides near the back, gets off near Holloway?" Ellie wrinkled her nose. "There's a lot of kids like that. This one, she was crying today." Ellie tilted her head, thoughtful. "I think her name might be Lacey. She's in Mrs. Harmon's class. No one really talks to her." Ben nodded, said nothing more. That night, while Ellie worked on a jigsaw puzzle at the table, Ben made grilled cheese and tomato soup, his usual fallback on nights when the fridge looked more like a desert than a kitchen. The heat clicked on and off, humming through the small apartment like an old friend whispering lullabies. When he tucked Ellie in, she asked, "Is she okay, that girl?" Ben paused at the door. "I don't know. Maybe she just needs time." Ellie nodded like she understood more than he'd said. "You could give her a peppermint, like when I was sad after Mom." He smiled, though it pulled something tight in his chest. "That's not a bad idea." So the next morning, before the route began, he placed a single peppermint on the edge of the seat where she usually sat. No note, no explanation. Just the candy, carefully unwrapped and nestled into a folded napkin. She boarded quietly, as always, took her seat, saw the peppermint, paused. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment, then closed around it so quickly it might have been a reflex. She didn't look up, didn't say a word, but she stopped crying for that morning at least. Ben didn't expect gratitude, didn't need it. But there was something in that small act that made the cold morning feel less heavy, like the sky had brightened just a shade. The next day he left another, a different flavor. This time she looked up at the mirror as she picked it up. Not directly at him, just enough. Their ritual began without words. Peppermints on the seat, silent nods, slight glances, and still, she rode alone. Ben didn't ask questions, but his eyes grew sharper. He noticed the worn cuffs of her jacket, the way she flinched when the other kids laughed too loud, the bruise hidden beneath her collar one morning, faint, yellowing, the kind you don't get from falling on ice. She reminded him of someone, not Maren, not Ellie, himself maybe. A version of himself, years ago, before responsibility had carved grooves into his face, and sorrow had made a home behind his ribs. Lacey, if that was her name, carried sadness the way some people carry secrets. Close, quiet, unbearable to the touch. One morning, a week into their silent exchange, she left something behind. It was a small piece of paper, folded into a square, tucked under the seat. Ben found it while sweeping the aisle after the last drop-off. It had one sentence written in the neat, careful print of a child who didn't want to be misunderstood. "Thank you for noticing me." Ben held the paper in his hands like it might dissolve. His eyes stung, though he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something deeper. That night he placed the note beside Ellie's dinner plate. "She left it on the bus," he explained. Ellie read it twice. "She's lonely." "Yes." Ellie picked at her peas. "You should talk to her. I don't want to scare her away." "Maybe you don't have to talk," she said. "You're already listening." Ben didn't sleep well that night. He dreamed of snow that never melted, of a bus that drove itself through streets he didn't recognize, of a little girl curled in the back seat, crying soundlessly while the world passed by, too busy to stop. Next day he left something new, a small note, folded, simple. "You're not invisible. I see you." She read it, kept her face still. But when she stepped off, she turned just slightly, like she might say something. She didn't, but her hands didn't tremble. After that, things began to shift in ways only someone paying close attention would notice. She sat straighter, wore a scarf one day, too big but warm. Her hair wasn't brushed but no longer tangled like thread caught in branches. And sometimes, just for a moment, her eyes lifted to meet his in the mirror. Still no words, but her silences softened. Ben didn't press. He gave space, gave routine, gave the gift of simply being there. And she returned, every day, until one morning just before Christmas break, she stepped onto the bus, paused by his seat and said, almost inaudibly, "Thank you," then took her place, peppermint in hand. He didn't answer, just smiled through the mirror. As the engine hummed beneath them and snow fell gentle and slow outside, Ben felt something shift inside him, something old and aching, now warm with quiet. Hope. She was still hurting, but she was also still here, and sometimes that was enough to begin again. The next morning, Ben rose earlier than usual. The kettle sang softly in the kitchen, steam curling against the window pane as the sky bled a dull gray into the world. Snow had come hard in the night, thick and heavy, the kind that muffled sound and swallowed footprints. Ellie slept in, curled like a comma under her quilt, her cheek pressed against a worn stuffed fox. Ben paused in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall. He whispered her name, not to wake her, but to remind himself who he was doing all this for. The bus was colder than usual. It creaked when he stepped inside, and the breath from his mouth fogged in front of him like a ghost. The peppermint sat in its usual place, beside the folded note he'd written the night before. He hesitated a moment, then added something else, a tiny plastic snow globe, no bigger than a walnut with a tiny deer inside. A toy from Ellie's old collection, one she had long forgotten. As the route began, Ben found his mind drifting back to the girl's eyes. The bruised blue beneath them, the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the scrape that hadn't come from a fall on the ice. He could see that now, too thin, too purposeful, like someone had wanted to remind her of something painful. She boarded quietly, glanced at the snow globe, pocketed the note, said nothing, but her hands no longer trembled. And for Ben, that was enough. For now, he didn't ask questions. Not yet. But his eyes followed her reflection in the mirror the way a lighthouse watches the sea. Steady, silent, always searching. The week unraveled in small gestures. Each day, she came. Each day, she sat in the same place. And though her voice barely reached the world, her silences began to shift. One afternoon, Ellie left another note. This one was written in orange marker and said simply, "You can sit with us if you want." Ben placed it beside the peppermint. This time, the girl read it, right there on the seat, folding the paper into smaller and smaller squares until it could disappear into her pocket. She didn't look up. But she didn't cry either. That night, Ellie asked again, "Does she have a name?" Ben hesitated. "She hasn't told me." "Then she's still scared." "Maybe," he replied. "Maybe she just hasn't felt safe enough yet." Ellie thought about that, then nodded. The next day, the girl stayed behind after everyone else had stepped off. Her fingers clutched the edges of her seat, white-knuckled. She looked down at her shoes, then up at Ben. "My name's Lacey," she said, voice like a snowflake landing on bare skin. He smiled gently. "That's a beautiful name," she nodded. Didn't smile, but didn't flee either. "I like the mints," she added. He nodded once. "I thought you might." She left without another word. That night, Ben lay awake longer than usual. His thoughts tangled. Lacey, her silence, her sudden softness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was beginning to unravel, and not just her, but the whole delicate balance. The next few days were different. She started arriving earlier, less rushed. Her coat was still thin, her shoes still worn, but her eyes were less clouded. One day, she even brought something with her, a crumpled brown paper bag. She handed it to Ben without a word as she stepped off. Inside was a single cookie, burned on one edge, wrapped in a napkin with a drawing of a heart and the letter L. Ben didn't eat it. He kept it, pressed the napkin flat and placed it inside his glove box. A quiet offering. Proof that her silence was not without feeling. That afternoon, as he cleaned out the trash from beneath the seats, he found something odd near Lacey's usual spot. A scrap of lined notebook paper, torn and half wet, as if hastily discarded. On it a few words. He said if I told, he'd find me again. Ben stared at the paper until the cold bit through his gloves. The words echoed, slow and heavy, like a stone sinking into dark water. He didn't know what to do. He folded the paper, placed it with the napkin in his glove box. The bus felt different now, no longer just a vessel of steel and rubber, but a shelter holding someone's fragile truth. That night, he told Ellie a story, not about Lacey, but about a fox who had lost her den and wandered through snowstorms until she found a cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. The fox didn't go inside at first. She just watched, listened, and eventually, she was invited in, not because she asked, but because someone left the door open and the fire warm. Ellie smiled and said, "I hope the fox stayed." "She did," Ben whispered. The next day, Lacey didn't come. Ben waited too long at her stop, drawing honks and calls from dispatch. The cold was cruel that morning, cutting through even the heater's groan. But her spot stayed empty. The day, after that, empty again. On the third day, Ben called in a delay and stepped off the bus. He walked the block around her stop, past shuttered buildings and a laundromat with blinking fluorescent lights, past the old warehouse where she'd vanished once. And there, behind a cracked dumpster, he found her, curled into herself like paper soaked in rain. Her backpack torn, one shoe missing, her lips split, crusted with blood. She didn't run. He crouched, beside her, slow, careful. "Lacey," he said, just her name. She looked up, dazed but aware. "I didn't tell him," she whispered. "I didn't, I swear." Ben didn't ask who, didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, he took off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands didn't shake, but inside something broke, something that had stayed quiet for years. "I know you didn't," he said. "You don't have to explain. You're safe now." She nodded, eyes closing, her body leaning into the fabric like it had been waiting for this warmth all her life. Didn't drive the route that day. Instead, he called someone he trusted, a counselor who worked with the school Ellie used to attend, a woman who believed in soft voices and warm cocoa. Lacey said little, but she didn't protest. She sat quietly in the office, coat still wrapped tight, and when they asked if she wanted to talk, she nodded. Once, Ben stood outside the frosted window, watching, waiting. He hadn't expected to care this much. He hadn't meant to carry her pain. But sometimes life chose you to be the lighthouse. That evening as he drove the empty bus home, Ellie climbed up beside him. "You found her, didn't you?" "I did." "She okay?" He thought for a long time. "She's beginning to be." Ellie reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a new drawing. A snow globe this time with 2 deer inside. "Give her this," she said, "so she knows she's not alone in there." Ben didn't speak, just kept driving, the snow falling softer, now as if even the sky had decided to be gentle for once. The first morning after winter break arrived like a hesitant breath, cold, gray, and strangely still. The streets wore a thin skin of frost, untouched by plows or the morning rush. Ben sat behind the wheel of his bus, gloved hands tightening, around his coffee thermos waiting for the heater to cough its first sputters of warmth. It had been 2 weeks. 2 long, quiet weeks without peppermint exchanges, without soft glances through the mirror, without the girl in seat 17. He hadn't realized how deeply she'd carved a space into his routine until she was gone from it. Lacey. The name had become real in his mind now, no longer a guess. Ellie had confirmed it after overhearing someone at school mention her, a girl who rarely spoke, who drew pictures instead of taking notes, who flinched when doors slammed too hard. Ben had thought about her every day during break, wondered where she was, if she was safe, if the bruises had faded, if she'd ever find it in herself to speak again. The bus route started like always. Children boarded in noisy flurries, cheeks red from the cold, boots stomping away sleep. Ben greeted each with a nod or a quiet morning. His eyes flickered to the back rows with every stop. Then at the Holloway Street stop she appeared. Lacey stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as though she wasn't sure she was still allowed to exist in the same space she'd once belonged to. Her coat looked newer, still too large but zipped up properly. Her eyes found his in the mirror almost instantly. They were clearer now, awake, but still wary. Ben didn't smile, not too much, just enough to let her know nothing had changed. She hesitated before moving toward the back, clutching something in her hand. Not a backpack, not gloves, a small folded sketch pad. He noticed the change immediately. Her seat had never looked like it belonged to anyone until now. She pulled the pad into her lap and began sketching, the way some kids scrolled on their phones, absently but with focus. At the next stoplight, Ben glanced in the mirror. She wasn't crying. The ride was uneventful in all the ways that mattered. The heater finally kicked in. The kids settled into their usual lull of pre-class yawns and whisper fights, and Ben let the silence be what it needed to be. After school that day, Lacey lingered. She didn't get off with the others. She waited until the last student clambered down the steps, then slowly approached the front of the bus. Ben turned in his seat, letting the engine idle. She stood there, small and silent, clutching the sketch pad like a shield. "I drew something," she said, voice thin but whole. Ben nodded, careful not to startle her. "Can I see it?" She opened the pad, flipped through a few pages, then stopped. It was him. A pencil sketch of the bus from the inside. Rows of seats, fogged windows, and at the front, a man with kind eyes and a travel mug. "You remember details?" Ben said, gently. "I draw what I don't say," she replied. "Then, you're the first person who noticed me since I moved here." Ben took a breath. "I'm glad you let me." She nodded, then added, "Can I sit in the front tomorrow?" "Of course." That night, Ben told Ellie about the drawing. "She showed it to you?" Ellie asked, stirring her cereal long after dinner. "She did. She trusts you. She's starting to." Ellie smiled, a slow, proud curve. "You're good at that." Ben wanted to tell her he wasn't always, that once, long ago, he'd failed someone he should have noticed sooner. That guilt had a way of folding itself into the quiet spaces of your life and never quite letting go. But he didn't say that. He just poured them both hot chocolate and let the silence hold the weight. The next morning, Lacey climbed onto the bus and took the front seat beside the door. She had her sketch pad again and a new pair of mittens, knitted, mismatched, clearly handmade. She didn't speak much, but Ben didn't mind. She didn't need to. The way she settled in, the way her shoulders stayed down instead of tight around, her ears said enough. Days passed like this, simple, steady. Some mornings she shared a sketch, a bird on a wire, a snow-covered mailbox, a cat she'd seen in a window. Other days she just sat, eyes watching the world blur past. Ben learned to wait for her drawings the way one waits for sunlight after a storm. Then one afternoon, Lacey didn't show. Ben checked the stop again. Twice. No Lacey. The next morning, still, no sign. 3 days passed and each one felt heavier than the last. On the fourth morning, Ben did something he hadn't done in years. He parked the bus early, walked the block down Holloway Street and stared at the apartment building she usually emerged from. It was a crumbling structure, graffiti on the side, mailboxes rusted. A landlord's forgotten responsibility. He didn't go in, just stood on the opposite sidewalk and waited, hands deep in his coat pockets. A woman stepped out, frazzled, late, yelling into a phone. A man followed, face hard with hangover, dragging his feet, but no Lacey. When he returned to the bus, Ellie was waiting for him on the step, confused. "I needed to check something," he told her. Ellie didn't ask, just slipped her hand into. As the next day, the seat at the front was empty again, but taped to the back of it was a note, folded and fluttering slightly as the heater kicked on. Ben opened it with trembling fingers. He got mad. "Broke a plate. Mom didn't say anything. I can't ride for a while, but I'm okay. Don't forget me." Ben sat down hard in the driver's seat. He didn't cry, but the ache behind his eyes felt dangerously close. That night, he stayed up long after Ellie had gone to bed. He Googled names, looked up city records, tried to find any information he could on the tenants at the Holloway apartments. There were rules, of course, boundaries. He couldn't interfere without evidence, but the line between doing nothing and doing too little haunted him. Ellie woke up at midnight to find him still at the kitchen table. "She's not okay," Ben said quietly. Ellie leaned against him. "Then you can't just wait." The next morning, Ben made a call. He spoke with a social worker he'd once driven during a community field trip. Gave what little information he had. Didn't embellish. Just facts. Quiet concern. He didn't know if it would help, but he refused to stay silent. 2 more days passed. Then on Monday she came back. Not alone. The woman beside her had a clipboard and warm eyes. She walked her to the bus, spoke softly, introduced herself as Ms. Calloway, a caseworker. Lacey climbed on slowly, the corner of her mouth twitching up in a faint smile when she saw Ben. She held out a new sketch. It was a bus. Full this time. Kids in every seat. And in the front seat, a girl with brown hair and a sketch pad, next to a driver with a peppermint in his hand. Ben chuckled quietly. "You're getting better," she shrugged, but her eyes glimmered. "You didn't forget me." Never. As the bus rolled forward into the morning light, Lacey looked out the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Things are still hard," she said. "I know. But they're not as lonely." Ben nodded. "That makes all the difference." She didn't reply, she didn't need to, and when he looked back at her in the mirror, she was already sketching again, lines and shapes forming slowly, one pencil, stroke at a time, a world of expression unfurling in silence. Just ahead, the road stretched open and long, the horizon kissed by gold. And for the first time in a long time, Ben believed in the possibility of change, not sudden, not sweeping, but quiet and kind, the kind that begins with noticing and continues with never turning away. Of course. Here's Section 4, a 1,500-word continuation adhering to your structure and tone requirements. Snow came heavy that week, burying curbs and softening every edge of the world. The roads were quieter, less impatient. Each morning required a little more effort, scraping windshields, warming engines, navigating slowly, but the bus always arrived on time. Ben had made sure of that. Lacey's presence at the front of the bus had become a quiet fixture, like the hum of the heater or the ticking of the dashboard clock. She never missed a day now. Every morning she climbed aboard with her sketch pad, tucked under her arm, her fingers always a little red from the cold but never trembling, and she spoke more. Not loudly, never that, but with increasing clarity. She asked Ben questions, small, sincere ones. What kind of dog he thought would be best for someone with a small apartment, why the sky looked paler after it snowed, whether he thought people changed because they wanted to or because they had no choice. Ben answered every question carefully. He never gave her less than the truth. She deserved that much, at least. "You'd like greyhounds," he said once. "They're quiet, thoughtful. They don't bark unless they mean it." Lacey had smiled at that, a real one, not hiding it behind her collar. Ellie noticed the difference, too. She and Lacey had formed an unspoken alliance. They never really talked on the bus. Ellie understood when space was sacred, but they shared small exchanges. A sticker, a compliment about shoelaces, a shared bag of popcorn on a Friday afternoon. What once felt like a fracture had become a bond, stitched slowly together by mutual respect. But peace never lingers untouched. Not for long. It was the first Friday of February when Lacey didn't show up for the afternoon pickup. The school office told Ben she hadn't checked out early. Her teacher hadn't seen her leave. The counselor assumed she'd walked home. Ben knew better. He drove the rest of the route with a knot in his stomach. When the last student stepped off, he kept the engine running and sat there, staring out at the street lamps flickering on like cautious stars. Then, against protocol and better judgment, he turned the wheel toward Holloway Street. The building hadn't changed, still gray and quiet, like it had been drained of color decades ago. He parked across from it, heart steady in the way that comes before action. He didn't expect to see her, not really, but he hoped. And hope, when wrapped in worry, makes you do reckless things. As he was about to step down from the bus, the front door of the apartment opened. Lacey stumbled out. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing he noticed. No tears, no red face, just silence. Her eyes scanned the street until they landed on him, and for a second her whole frame froze. Then she ran, straight into the open door of the bus. Ben caught her in mid-step, steadying her by the shoulders. "He wasn't supposed to be back," she whispered. "He said it was my fault, that I'd made them ask questions." Ben knelt so their eyes were level. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "Not this time. He punched the wall. My mom told me to go to my room and stay quiet." Ben's voice was low. "Where is he now?" Still yelling, still blaming. Ben took a breath through his nose. "You're not going back there tonight." Lacey's eyes darted to the open sidewalk. "They'll come looking." "I know," he said. "And when they do, we'll be ready." He didn't ask her to explain further. He didn't press. Instead, he guided her to the seat behind him, the same seat she'd claimed that first week, school, and handed her a blanket he kept for emergencies. Then, as snow began falling again, Ben picked up his phone. The call was brief, direct. He explained who he was, what had just happened, and gave the name of the caseworker, Ms. Calloway. Within 10 minutes, she was en route. Within 20, so were 2 officers. By the time they arrived, Lacey had drawn half a picture, just outlines of buildings, uneven rooftops, and one small figure holding a leash beside a tall dog. She didn't speak when Ms. Calloway stepped onto the bus, but she didn't recoil either. That meant everything. They took her with calm assurances and no sudden movements. Ms. Calloway promised to follow up, promised to keep Ben updated, promised she'd be placed somewhere safer this time. Ben didn't say much, just handed over the sketch pad, her scarf, and one small envelope he hadn't noticed until Lacey had left it on the seat. He opened it later. At home, with Ellie watching from across the table. Inside was a drawing. Of the bus. Of him. Of Ellie, sitting a few rows back. Everyone was smiling, including Lacey. On the bottom were 4 words in small, square handwriting. "Thank you for noticing." Ellie touched the corner of the drawing. "She'll be okay now." Ben nodded, even if a part of him knew that okay wasn't a place you reached overnight. Okay was a direction, a slow climb, a thing built piece by piece with trust and time. Weeks passed. March rolled in with patches of warmth between the freezes. Trees began shaking off their snow. The mornings came earlier, a little brighter each day. Lacey didn't return to the bus, but she sent updates, through Ms. Calloway, through folded letters slipped into school mailboxes. Ben received 2 drawings, one of a small room with fairy lights, another of a park bench surrounded by geese. Each one came with a note. I'm me. Learning how to breathe. He's not allowed near me anymore. I sleep through the night now. Then, in late April, a field trip was scheduled. The school asked Ben to drive the group. The permission slips were signed. The chaperones briefed. He didn't expect her to be there. He certainly didn't expect her to be waiting by the doors, standing next to a woman he recognized from the family placement agency. But there she was, hair a little longer, shoes with actual color on them, and a small bright band of woven friendship. Bracelets around one wrist. When she boarded the bus, the air shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that the kids looked up, curious. But Ben smiled, and this time Lacey smiled back, freely, without fear. She sat behind him again, like old times. No sketchpad today. Just her and a long gaze out the window. At the museum, she stuck close to the group, asked questions, even laughed once too loud and then embarrassed. But no one mocked her. Ellie waved from across the exhibit when she saw her, and Lacey waved back. On the way home, she sat beside Ellie. They shared a packet of fruit snacks and whispered the whole ride. Ben watched through the mirror and didn't interrupt. When they arrived at school, Lacey hung back. She walked up to him, both hands in her jacket pockets. I might be switching schools soon. Closer to where my new foster mom lives. Ben kept his voice calm. That's a good thing. I think so. There was a pause. I just didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. Ben looked at her fully now. You don't have to say goodbye. She tilted her head. You can say, see you when I see you, he said. It hurts less. She nodded slowly. Okay. Then almost shyly, she reached into her pocket and handed him something. A small drawing, no bigger than a postcard. It was the first bus ride they'd ever shared, rendered in soft charcoal lines. She sat alone. He was just a silhouette in the front. But there was light coming through the windows. Gentle, even in black and white. This one's for you, she said. He took it, heart suddenly tight. Thank you, he said, for letting me see your world. She turned to go, but before she stepped off the bus, she added over her shoulder, you helped it feel safe. Ben watched her walk toward the school doors, Ellie running up to catch her, both of them laughing as they disappeared inside. For a long moment, he just sat there, fingers resting on the drawing. The bus was empty. Now, but not hollow. Never hollow. Only quiet. And that kind of quiet, earned, healing, patient, was the kind worth listening to.